table wines. These effects are often highly specific. Table 3.2, presumably involving modification of their respective partition constants. Because enhanced volatility appears most marked at low alcohol contents, Fig 3.16, its significance relative to ester detection may be limited to the finish and in-mouth sensations. At this point, the alcohol content may have fallen sufficiently to increase volatility. Equally, evaporation of alcohol from wine coating the sides of the glass following swirling may also affect the release of aromatics. Figure 3.15 Frequency distribution for individual 2,4,6 trichloronisol thresholds in Sauvignon Blanc wine, from Supranant and Butsk, 1996, reproduced by permission. Odor perception 77. Table 3.1 Detection thresholds of some aromatic compounds found in wine 1. Compound threshold, mg/liter, reference. Acids. Acetic acid 200,000 Guth, 1997b. Butyric acid 1732 Ferreira et al. 2000. Decanoic acid 1000, 15,000 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Hexanoic acid 420, 3000 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Isobutyric acid 2300, 10,000 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Isovaleric acid 33 Ferreira et al. 2000. Octanoic acid 500 Ferreira et al. 2000. Propanoic acid 420 Ferreira et al. 2000. Alcohols. Ethanol 2.8 to 90-10 9 Milgard and Reed, 1979. 1-hexanol 8000 Guth, 1997b. 3-hexanol 400 Guth, 1997b. Isobutanol 40,000 Guth, 1997b. Isomal alcohol 30,000 Guth, 1997b. Methionol 1000 Ferreira et al. 2000. Aldehydes and ketones. Acetaldehyde 500 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Acetone 150,000 Ferreira et al. 2000. Diacetyl 100 Guth, 1997b. Esters. Ethyl acetate 12,200, 7,500 Etuvant, 1991, Guth, 1997b. Ethyl butyrate 14, 20 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Ethyl decanoate 200 Ferreira et al. 2000. Ethyl hexanoate 14, 5 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Ethyl isobutyrate 15 Guth, 1997b. Ethyl isovalerate 3 Ferreira et al. 2000. Ethyl 2-methylbutyrate 18, 1 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Ethyl octanoate 5, 2 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Isomal acetate 30 Guth, 1997b. 3-methylbutyl acetate 30 Guth, 1997b. Lactones. G-decalactone 88, 0.7 Etuvant, 1991, Ferreira et al. 2004. G-dodecalactone 7 Ferreira et al. 2004. Z6-dodecenoic acid G-lactone 0.1 Guth, 1997b. 4-hydroxy 2,5-dimethyl 2H. Furanon. 5 Guth, 1997b. G-nonolactone 25 Ferreira et al. 2004. Cis-oak-lactone 67 etuvant, 1991. Cetolin 5 Guth, 1997b. Norisoprenoids. B-damascenon 0.05 Guth, 1997b. B-ionon 0.09 Ferreira et al. 2000. Continued. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 78. Guth and Size, 2002, considered that suppression of fruitiness by increasing alcohol content resulted primarily from its effect on perception, not volatilization. However, Escalona et al. 1999, found that increasing alcohol content progressively decreased the volatility of several higher alcohol and aldehydes, as did Connor et al. 1998, for some ethyl esters. The likely complex interaction of alcohol and other wine constituents on wine flavor has been highlighted by LeBer et al. 2007. They found both synergy and suppression among B-methyl G-octalactone, oak-lactone, isomal. Table 3.1 Detection thresholds of some aromatic compounds found in wine 1, continued. Compound threshold, mg/liter, reference. Phenols and phenyl derivatives. Ethyl dihydrocinamate 1.6 Ferreira et al. 2000. Transethyl cinnamate 1 Ferreira et al. 2000. 4-ethyl guaracol 33 Ferreira et al. 2000. 4-ethyl phenol 440 Boydron et al. 1988. Eugenol 5 Guth, 1997b. Guaracol 10 Guth, 1997b. 2-phenethyl acetate 250 Guth, 1997b. Phenylacetaldehyde 5 Ferreira et al. 2000. 2-phenylethanol 14,000, 10,000 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Vanillin 200 Guth, 1997b. 4-vinyl guaracol 10, 40 Ferreira et al. 2000, Color Air et al. 2004. Pyrazines. 2-methoxy-3-isobutyl-pyrazine 0.002, 0.015 Ferreira et al. 2000, Ruyada Bubi et al. 2000. 3-isobutyl 2-methoxypyrazine 0.002 Ferreira et al. 2000. Sulfur compounds. Benzenemethanethiol 0.0003 Taminiga et al. 2003. Dimethyl sulfide, DMS, 25, 60 Gonick and Noble, 1987, Demora et al. 1987. Dimethyl disulfide, DMDS, 29 Gonick and Noble, 1987. Ethyl mercaptan, ethanethiol, 1.1 Gonick and Noble, 1987. Hydrogen sulfide 5-80 Wenzel et al. 1980. 3-mercaptoxyl acetate 0.004 Taminiga et al. 1998. 4-mercapto-4-methylpentan 210.0006 Guth, 1997b. 3-mercaptoxan 1-ol 0.06 Taminiga et al. 1998. 2-methyl-3-fluoranthiol 0.005 Ferreira et al. 2002. Methyl-mercaptan, methanethiol, 2-force, 1983. 3-methylthio, 1-propanol 1500, Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997b. Terpenes. Geraniol 30 Guth, 1997b. Linalool 25, 15 Ferreira et al. 2000, Guth, 1997. CIS rose oxide 0.2 Guth, 1997b. Wine lactone 0.01 Guth, 1997b. 1 odor thresholds often vary considerably depending on the procedure used, solvent involved, type of wine, presence of other aromatic compounds, and the acuity of the taster, s. Thus, threshold values are primarily useful in comparing the potential flavor impact of various compounds. Odor perception 79. Acetate and alcohol content. A caveat to these interpretations, relative to wine, may be indicated by the work of Psakaki et al. 2005. They found that effects like those noted previously were markedly affected by the conditions of the experiment. Most studies have been conducted under equilibrium conditions, when the net transfer of aromatics between the wine and headspace are equal. However, under normal tasting conditions, the situation is dynamic, with more aromatic compounds leaving the wine than returning. An example of results under dynamic conditions is illustrated in Fig. 3.17. Numerous other wine constituents can influence aromatic volatility. For example, grape and yeast polysaccharides 3 influence the liberation of esters, higher alcohols, and diacetyl. Dufour and Bayonov, 1999a, flavonoids affect the release of various esters and aldehydes, Dufour and Bayonov, 1999b, and anthocyanins. 3-ramogalactrinous and arabinogalactan proteins, grape-derived, and manna proteins. Yeast-derived. 2. 2. 3. 2. 2. 2. 2 2 2. 2. 4. 2 3 3. 3. 2 2. 4. 4. 2. 2. 2. 2 3. 2. Figure 3.16 Effect of ethanol on the headspace composition of a synthetic mixture. Ethyl acetate, ethyl butyrate, 3-methylbutyl acetate, 2-methylbutanol, from Williams, and Rosser, P.R. 1981. Aroma-enhancing effect of ethanol. Chemistry. Senses 6. 149153. Reproduced by permission of Oxford University Press. Table 3.2 Effect of ethanol on the odor threshold of some wine aromatics. In air, ethanol in the gas phase 55.6 mg/liter. Compound. Odor threshold, ing/L. Factor B/A without ethanol, A, with ethanol, B. Ethyl isobutanoate 0.338 127. Ethyl butanoate 2.5 280. Ethyl hexanoate 990 10. Methylpropanol 640 200, 000 312. 3-methylbutanol 125 6350. Source: reproduced from Grosk, W. 2001. Evaluation of the key odorants of foods by dilution. Experiments, aroma models and omission. Chemistry. Senses 26, 533545, based on data from Guth. 1997a, by permission from Oxford University Press. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 80. Bind volatile phenolics, such as vanillin, Dufer and Sovatra, 2000. Thus, it is not surprising that the detection threshold of the same compound can vary considerably depending on the wine in which it occurs. For example, the detection threshold of diacetyl was found to vary from 0.2 mg/L in Chardonnay to 0.9 mg/L in Pinot Noir and 2.8 mg/L in Cabernet Sauvignon, Martinho et al., 1995. Even subthreshold concentrations of tastants may reduce the threshold of aromatics, Dalton et al. 2000, Pfeffer et al. 2005. Such effects appear to be largely the result of learned associations but may also have a physicochemical component. For example, at low sugar concentrations, 1%, the volatility of ethyl acetate and ethanol are enhanced, Nawar, 1971, but can reduce the volatility and detection of acetaldehyde, Meyer, 1970. At higher concentrations, 10%, sugars may increase the volatilization of some aromatics, Taylor, 1998. Modification of the equilibrium between solubility and volatility may be the source of these effects. Many of the effects noted previously probably arise from the multisensory nature of flavor memory. For example, learned association probably explains why Chardonnay wines were better identified when sampled glob. Ally, normal tasting, than orthonasally, only by smell, Borlister et al. 2005, or why sucrose can be critical to the perceived flavor intensity of pep. Permint in gum, Cook et al. 2003. In addition, reducing the alcohol content can increase a wine's perceived acidity and astringency, Guth, 1998. As noted by Hort and Hollowood, 2004, cross-modal interactions can be highly individualistic. This reflects both the individuality of sensitivity as well as experience. Figure 3.17. Intensity of octanol, diacetyl, small black square. Linalool, ethyl butyrate, black diamond. And limon, as ethanol. Concentration of the ethanol vapors increased, reproduced from Asner. M. Tsukaki, M. Linforth, R.S.T. Ferreira, V. and Taylor, A.J. 2004. Headspace analysis of volatile organic compounds from ethanolic systems by direct APSI. MS. Int. J. Mass Spectrometry 239. 1725, with permission from Elsevier. Odor perception 81. Saliva is an additional factor potentially affecting the release and perception of aromatic compounds. Wine tends to increase saliva production, potentially diluting the wine's ethanol content. In addition, enzymes in the saliva could modify the chemical nature and volatility of wine aromatics. For example, saliva can degrade esters and thiols, Buettner. 2002a, as well as reduce aldehydes to their corresponding alcohols. Buettner, 2002b. Enzymes could also degrade non-volatile aroma complexes, liberating them for release. Although not marked within the normal time frame of sampling a wine, 60s, such effects could affect the perception of its finish. Because salivary chemistry is not constant, even in the same individual, saliva variability is another source of the idiosyncratic nature of human sensory perception. The saliva also contains enzymes released by the oral microbial flora. These also could participate in the release flavorants from non-volatile glycosidic associations. This begins to take effect within 20s, Fig 3.18. Although their activity is reduced in the presence of alcohol, this influence may be limited by dilution in the mouth. Thus, there is the possibility that the enzymatic breakdown of glycosidically bound aromatics may, under certain conditions, contribute to the finish of some wines. When the detection threshold of an individual is markedly below normal, the condition is called anosmia. Anosmia can be general or affect only a small range of compounds, Amor, 1977. The occurrence of specific anosmias varies widely in the population. For example, it is estimated that Figure 3.18 assessment of hexanol release from hexyl B D-glucopyranoside in the mouth of the subject. The sample was introduced at 15s. Reproduced from Hemingway, K.M. Alston, M.J., Chappell, C.G., and Taylor, A.J. 1999. Carbohydrate flavor conjugates in wine. Carbohydrate polymers 38, 283286. With permission from Elsevier. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 82. About 3% of the human population is anosmic to isovalerate, sweaty. Whereas 47% is anosmic to 5-andros-16-CN31, urinous. The genetic neurological nature of most specific anosmias is unknown. Hyperosmia, the detection of odors at abnormally low concentrations, is little understood. One of the most intriguing accounts of hyperosmia relates to a 3-week experience of a medical student suddenly able to recognize people and objects by their odors, Sachs, 1985. Hyperosmia may also occur in people treated with L-DOPA, a synthetic neurotransmitter, as well as in some individuals with Tourette's syndrome. Reduced mucus production in the nasal passages may be associated with hyperosmia. The origin of the limited odor identification skills of humans is unknown. It may arise from the small size of the human olfactory epithelium and olfactory bulbs. For example, dogs possess an olfactory epithelium up to 15 cm 2 in surface area, containing about 200 million receptor cells. Whereas the olfactory patches in humans cover about 2 to 5 cm 2, Moran et al., 1982, and possess an estimated 6 to 10 million receptors, Dobbs, 1989. Considering the effective olfactory area, the cilia, dogs may have 7m2, Moulton, 1977, in comparison to the 22 cm 2 for humans, Doty, 1998. Comparative measurements of the odor thresholds in dogs and Humans suggest that dogs are at least 100 times more sensitive than humans, Moulton et al., 1960. However, this does not apply to all odor. Ants. For example, humans are as sensitive, or slightly better, than dogs. With some aliphatic aldehydes, Lasker et al., 2000. As far as functional olfactory genes, dogs possess about 970, Olender et al., 2004, mice about 913, Godfrey et al., 2004, but humans only about 340, Malnick et al., 2004. This likely accounts for some of our limited identification ability. Additional reasons may involve the suggestion by Stoddart, 1986. He suggested that repression of odor sensitivity was selected during human evolution to minimize conflict associated with our gregarious lifestyle and the development of nuclear families. However, the process of inactivation of olfactory genes, 65% in humans, appears to have started earlier, correlate in with the development of tricolor vision in our primate ancestors, Jalad et al., 2004, and continuing in association with movement of the eyes forward to facilitate stereoscopic vision. Thus, our current state of olfactory incompetence may stem more from increased reliance on vision than a need to reduce territoriality in tribal groupings. Although in human evolution, there has been a loss of olfactory structures and receptor proteins, there has been an enrichment in cerebral processing. Our responses to odors are largely learned, not hardwired. Thus, combined with our remarkable capacity for memory and language, our discriminatory powers concerning odors are still remarkable. What is generally odor perception? 83. Lacking is training. There may also be a critical period to odor learning, similar to that of language acquisition. Two other olfactory thresholds are generally recognized: recognition and differentiation. The recognition threshold refers to the minimum concentration at which an aromatic compound can be correctly identified. The recognition threshold is typically higher than the detection threshold. The differentiation threshold is the concentration difference between samples required for sensory discrimination. It is important to distinguish identification, in isolation, from differentiation, by direct comparison. The former is far more difficult than the latter. It is the equivalent of differentiating shades of color side by side. From recognizing these shades when presented separately, especially several days later, it is generally recognized that people have considerable difficulty identifying odors correctly, especially without visual or contextual clues. Ingen. 1987. Nevertheless, it is often thought that expert tasters and perfumers have superior identification skills. For example, Jones, 1968, estimated that perfumers were able to identify from 100 to 200 odorants. Although sensory skills obviously differ, whether wine professionals, such as sommeliers and masters of wine, possess abilities as acute as assumed is unsubstantiated. Noble et al., 1984, Morat, 2004. In addition, even if such superior skills were to exist, what relevance would it have to the majority of us who are mere mortals? Even Winemakers frequently fail to recognize their own wines in blind tastings, and experienced wine professionals frequently misidentify the varietal and geographical origin of wines. Morat, 2004. Although not correlating with the public impression, it is easy to comprehend in the face of the marked variability that exists within regional and varietal wines. Fig 3.19. What is surprising is the comparative success tasters may have. For example, experienced tasters at Davis, California, correctly identified the varietal origin of more than 40% of the experimental wines sampled. Winternet al., 1975. As expected, the most easily recognized were those from familiar cultivars with pronounced aromas. Figure 3.19 Plot of principal component scores of 24 Bordeaux wines based on 9 aroma attributes. 1.5, Saint Estèphe, 6.10, Saint Julien, 11.15, Margaux, 16.20, Saint Emilion, 21.22, Haute Medoc, 23, Medoc, 24, Bordeaux. Note the considerable dispersion in sensory attributes of these regional wines. Williams et al., 1984a, reproduced with permission. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 84. For example, Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Syrah, Zinfandel, Muscat, Gewürztraminer, and Riesling. What superior tasters exhibit may be above normal olfactory memory, combined with better acuity, superior motivation, and years of experience. Ross, 2006. The problems of odor identification become compounded when they occur in mixtures. Jinks and Lang, 2001. Because individual receptors may respond differentially to several odorants, possessing a common ligand, and the same odorants activate several distinct receptors, depending on their concentration. Malnick et al., 1999. Odor recognition is primarily based on learned pattern recognition, such as with facial recognition. Murray, 2004. Thus, the stimulation of several receptors, some of which may be the same, by an odorant mixture increasingly complicates identification of individual components. Lang, 1994, but does not necessarily prevent identification of the mixture. Jinks and Lang, 2001. The same situation presumably occurs with wines possessing multiple aromatics at or above their individual threshold levels. Correspondingly, identification of varietal or regional wine styles is thought to be primarily based on the holistic response to the pattern generated by multiple aromatics and tastants, not individual components. Since tasters differ in sensitivity and experience, it is not surprising that the odor memories, and the descriptors used to describe them, vary widely. Brochet and Duberdieu, 2001, found evidence suggesting the experience affects the memories and terms used. For example, wine critics tend to use quality-related expressions, whereas wine makers are more likely to use enology-related terms. Nevertheless, with training, most tasters come to agree on common attributes. Those that remain idiosyncratic or inconsistent in term use are typically eliminated from a panel. Training tends to level out differences in olfactory experience. Ents that can complicate differentiation of particular aromatic combinations, case it al. 2004. In most tests of odor recall, the sample contains a single compound or, if a mixture, the task is simple. Name the source, for example, a particular fruit. However, studies of the ability to name individual components of a mixture are rare. Figure 3.20 illustrates the difficulty of the task. This undoubtedly partially explains why identifying off odors differs depending on the wine in which it occurs. Fig 3.21. Trained professionals are somewhat. Figure 3.20% correct identification of the constituents of mixtures containing up to 5 odorous chemicals by untrained, small black square, trained, and expert subjects, from Lang, 1995, reproduced by permission. Odor perception 85. Better at identifying components of a mixture, but their ability tends to decline with more than 4 components, Livermore and Lang, 1996. Perfumers may appear to have superior skills in this regard because their assessments are based on paper wicks dipped into the perfume. As different components dissipate, the process generates the rough equivalent of a gas chromatographic separation. Somewhat equivalently, identification of components improves when people are first allowed to become adapted to specific constituents prior to testing. Goyert et al., 2007. Odors are often classified by origin, for example, floral, vegetal, smoky, or associated with specific events or locations, for example, Christmas, barbecuing, fires, hospitals. Thus, odor terms typically are concrete, referring to an object or experience, and not to the olfactory perception itself. Usually, the more significant the event, the more intense and stable the memory. Ingen, 1987, views this memory pattern as equivalent to how young children associate words. Children tend to categorize objects and events functionally, rather than conceptually. For example, a hat is something one wears rather than an article of clothing. This may partially clarify why it is so difficult to use unfamiliar terms, for example, chemical names, for familiar odors. The difficulty of correctly naming odors may arise from the localization of linguistic and olfactory processing in different hemispheres of the brain, left versus right, respectively. Herzit al., 1999. People also have difficulty envisaging odor sensations, in contrast to the ease of conjuring up visual and auditory memories. Verbal or contextual clues improve identification. De Wijck and Kane, 1994, in the same way that suggestion can influence what can be seen in cloud formations. Pronouncing the name of a cultivar or an odor often induces its detection, even in its absence. Suggestion seems to reorganize odor perception in a similar manner to that in which it reforms visual clues. Murphy, 1995. Although supplying verbal, visual, or contextual clues facilitates the identification of most odors, those learned without additional clues, for example, the smell of toast or frying bacon, are easily recognized by odor alone. Odor terms derived from personal experience are generally more easily recalled than those generated by others. Leona et al., 1999a. Thus, it is important that tasters be actively involved in developing a common odor lexicon so that communication can be effective. Gardner et al., 1996, Hers. Figure 3.21 Detection of off-odors in different wines: white wine, small black square; red wine, ethyl acetate. 60 mg/liter, oxidation, acetaldehyde, 67 mg/L. Vinegary, acetic acid, 0.5 g/L, buttery, diacetyl. 24 mg/L, TCA, 2,4,6-trichloronisole, 15 mg/L. Based on results from 42 subjects. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 86. And Ingen, 1996. In contrast, the terms most consumers and wine critics use express more their holistic or emotional response to the wine than its sensory attributes. Lehrer, 1975, Dewar, 1985. As with other attributes, perceived intensity often varies considerably. Compounds such as hydrogen sulfide or mercaptan seem intense even at their recognition thresholds. Detectable differences in intensity vary markedly among odorants. For example, a threefold increase in perceived intensity was correlated with a 25-fold increase in the concentration of propanol, but a 100-fold increase in the concentration of amyl butyrate. Kane, 1978. Sources of variation in olfactory perception. Small sex-related differences have been detected in olfactory acuity. Women are generally more sensitive to and more skilled in identifying odors than men. Fig. 3.22, Chowdhury et al., 2003. This presumably relates to women becoming more sensitive to odors upon repeat exposure, by up to 5 orders of magnitude. Dalton et al., 2002. In addition, the cerebral activity of women on exposure to odors is considerably more marked than men. Usem et al., 1999. The types of odors identified may also show sex or experience related differences. Women generally identify floral and food odors better than men, whereas men tend to do better at identifying petroleum odors. In addition, women experience modulation in olfactory discrimination, correlated with cyclical hormonal changes. See Doty, 1986. However, the most significant factor differentiating people in sensory skill may be the remarkable genetic diversity between individuals, relative to their olfactory receptor, or genes. Menash et al., 2003. Each person tested had a distinctive or gene pattern. Their results also indicate that ethnic groups may differ in general olfactory sensitivity. Age also influences olfactory acuity. This may express itself in increased detection, identification, and discrimination thresholds. Leona et al., 1999a. There is also a reported reduction in short-term odor memory. Leona et al., 1999b. This seems to arise both from increased thresholds and greater difficulty in retrieving. Figure 3.22 Mean number of correct odor identifications, 1 SEM, by males and females. Over the course of 5 sessions, from Kane, 1982. Reproduced by permission. Sources of variation in olfactory perception 87. Verbal labels. Nevertheless, considerable diversity exists in all age groups. Doty et al., 1984. This probably reflects the incidence of extenuating FAC tors such as medication, smoking, and a history of nasal problems. The latter has been found to significantly influence olfactory function, especially in those more than 65 years old. McIsim et al., 2006. Cognitive status and health were found particularly important to olfactory function in scent. Narayan's, Elsner, 2001. Reduction in the regeneration of receptor neurons probably explains additional age-related olfactory loss. Doty and Snow, 1988. However, neuronal degeneration of the olfactory bulb and connections to the olfactory cortex may be equally important. Olfactory regions frequently experience earlier degeneration than other parts of the brain. Schiffman et al., 1979. This accounts for smell often being viewed as the first of the chemical senses to show age-related loss. In addition, it is clear that cognitive functions tend to decline with age. This is often particularly marked in terms of memory, such as learning odor names. Davis, 1977, Kane et al., 1995. Although wine judging ability may decline with age, experience and mental concentration may compensate for sensory loss. Nasal volume, especially in the area of the olfactory epithelium, can influence olfactory acuity. Dammit et al., 2002. This is well known from the short-term loss of smell associated with massive increases in mucus secretion caused by nasal and sinus infections. This effectively blocks air access to the olfactory regions, Fig 3.23, and diffusion to receptor neurons. In addition, infection may also accelerate certain degenerative changes, producing long-term acuity loss. Loss in olfactory ability may be associated with several major diseases, such as polio, meningitis, and osteomyelitis. Destruction of the olfactory nerve can cause total anosmia. In addition, some genetic diseases are associated with generalized anosmia, notably Kalman syndrome, deficiency in gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Many medications and drugs affect smell. Doty and Bromley, 2004. Cocaine, for example, disrupts the olfactory epithelium. Figure 3.23 schematic drawing, coronal, of the nasal cavity and paranasal sinuses. The left side is typical of chronic rhinitis, illustrating restricted airflow to the olfactory epithelium caused by congestion of the osteometal complex. The right side resembles typical airflow from Smith and Duncan, 1992, reproduced by permission. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 88. It is commonly believed that hunger increases olfactory acuity and, conversely, that satiation lowers it. This view is supported by a report that both hunger and thirst increase the general reactiveness of the olfactory bulb and cerebral cortex. Freeman, 1991. Smoking produces both short and long-term impairment of olfactory skills. Fig 3.24. Thus, smoking is not permitted in tasting rooms. Nonetheless, smoking has not prevented some individuals, notably Andre Chilischev, from becoming highly skilled winemakers and cellar masters. Adaptation is an additional source of altered olfactory perception, Fig 3.25. Adaptation can result from tempo loss in receptor excitability, CED sensitivity in the brain, or both. Zufall and Linders Zufall, 2000. Generally, the more intense the odor, the longer it takes for adaptation to develop. Because olfactory adaptation occurs rapidly, occasionally within seconds, the perceived fragrance of a wine may change quickly. Wine tasters are usually counseled to take only short sniffs. Normal acuity usu. Ally takes 30s to 1 minute to re-establish. Recovery frequently follows a curve similar to, but the inverse of, adaptation, Ekman et al., 1967. However, with aromatically complex wines, such as vintage ports, it can be beneficial to smell the wine over an extended period. Progressive adaptation can successively reveal different components of a wine's fragrance. This view is supported by one of the few studies on adaptation in odorant mixtures. De Wijck, 1989. The additive effect of dilute odor mixtures on decreasing sensory threshold has already been noted. The odorants need not even be seemingly related, Fig 3.14. This may have considerable importance in wine, where hundreds of compounds occur at or below their respective detection thresholds. Although strongly suspected to occur in wine, it has yet to be confirmed experimentally. Grosk, 2001. Of equal importance, but Figure 3.24 Effect of cumulative smoking dose and years since cessation from smoking for previous smokers. The individual data were fit to a distance-weighted least squares regression to derive the surface plot. Although a few subjects evidenced a smoking dose greater than 70 pack years, the pack year scales was limited for clarity of surface illustration. Upsit, University of Pennsylvania Smell Identification Test, from Fry et al., 1990. Reproduced by permission. Sources of variation in olfactory perception 89. Also little investigated, is the role of odor masking. This refers to the reduced detection of one odorant in the prison so far. Other. Guth, 1998, Cherney and Grosk, 2000. Cross adaptation is a related phenomenon, where prior exposure to an odorant increases the detection threshold to another. Masking is not always via cross-adaptation, as in the case with SO2. In this instance, as sulfur dioxide oxidizes or escapes from the wine, the rupture of sulfonate linkages releases compounds to which sulfate was bound. An example is the liberation and volatilization of diacetyl, Nielsen and Richelieu. 1999. The perception of aromatic compounds can also be influenced by other wine constituents. The effect of sugar in augmenting perceived fruitiness is well known, as is the influence of acidity on reducing perceived fruitiness. Von Sudo et al., 1974. For example, removal of citric and malic acids from a mixture of straw berry flavor and sucrose resulted in an increase in perceived fruitiness. Cook et al., 2003. These influences, which are Learned associations undoubtedly play a role in wine tasting and its pairing with food. Despite its importance to the sensory perception of wine, the interaction of food flavors with wine has been little studied. To date, few studies have investigated the interaction of wine and cheese. Negrin et al. 2003 b. In most instances, the interaction is similar to those of other complex mixtures, a reduction in perceived intensity, notably the wine, but also the cheese. The decrease in perception may result from reduced volatilization of wine aromatics, through absorption by lipids in the cheese. Fats coating taste receptors in the mouth may also be involved. A similar effect has been noted with hollandaise sauce. Negrin et al. 2001. In a separate investigation, Hersleth et al. 2003, showed that taking food with wine enhanced its appreciation, especially those with a buttery flavor. The interaction of various sensory modalities appears to depend on how the person assesses the combination. For example, interactions are less marked or are absent if the person analyzes taste and olfactory sensations individually, rather than concentrating on holistic perceptions. Frank. A. B. C. Figure 3.25 Adaptation in perceived magnitude of N-butyl acetate at A. 18.6 mg/L, B. 2.7 mg/L, and C. 0.8 mg/L, from Kane, 1974, reproduced by permission. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 90. et al., 1993. Thus, how the brain accesses odor memories and /or evaluates sensory data seems almost as important as the actual stimuli. The origin of odor preferences has been little studied. Nevertheless, it appears that threshold intensity is not particularly important. Trant and Pangborn, 1983. Odor preferences are clearly affected by pre- and post-natal experiences. Menela et al. 2001, and tend to mature most noticeably between the ages of 6 and 12. Garb and Stunkard, 1974, with further significant changes occurring as one ages. Moncrieff, 1967. There are equivalent age-related changes in wine partiality. Williams et al., 1982. However, these changes may relate more to experience than age itself. Although environmental conditions significantly affect the hedonic response to odors and wines, genetic differences in odor responsiveness noted earlier are clearly involved. For example, people generally fall into one of three classes relative to androstenone. Those detecting androstenone at low concentration consider it extremely unpleasant, urine-like. Those less sensitive often detect a sandalwood odor, whereas those insensitive express no reaction. Twin studies also support a genetic component, with identical twins showing similar responses, whereas fraternal twins often differ. Beecham, 1987. Hormonal or developmental factors may be involved in the higher proportion of women detecting androstenone than men. Contextual factors, such as taste. Zampini et al., 2008. Color intensity. Island and Marquise, 1993. Zellner and Whitten, 1999, and other visual clues. Sakai et al., 2005. Can potentially influence odor perception. The experiment of coloring a white wine with anthocyanins is now famous. Fig 3.26. It induced enology students to describe the white wine in terms typically ascribed to red wines. This influence occurred despite both control and colored samples being tasted together. Although striking, since the wine involved was a Sauvignon Blanc, possessing aromatic similarities to Bordeaux reds they often tried, the result is more understandable. In a somewhat similar investigation, where the panelists did not have the same expectations as in the Bordeaux study, experienced tasters were less biased by wine coloration. Parrot al. 2003. Brochet and Morat. 1999, and Langit al. 2002, have also presented revealing studies on the influence of contextual, label, knowledge on perception. Changes in preference, based on source knowledge, are common in almost all consumer goods. Such context effects are often the result of contrast, for example, a good wine. Figure 3.26 Frequency distribution of olfactory terms representative of red / dark objects, solid bars, and yellow / light objects, open bars, used to describe two paired tastings of a white and a red wine. W. Semillon / Sauvignon Blanc. R. Cabernet Sauvignon, and RW. Sample. W. Colored red with anthocyanins. Reproduced from Morat, G. Brochet, F. and Dubourdieu, D. 2001. The color of odors. Brain Language 79, 309-320, with permission from Elsevier. Sources of variation in olfactory perception 91. Appearing better when associated with poorer wines, but poorer when tasted with better wines. These influences are not caused by adaptation as they occur independently of their position in a wine tasting. Comments from tasters have long been suspected to influence perception. For example, the suggestion of the presence of a hazelnut odor often engenders similar remarks. Familiarity with an odor term also tends to increase perceived intensity and hedonic response to its presence. Distal and Hudson, 2001. With some odors, correct identification influences the emotional response. For example, recognizing lavender as such increased its perceived pleasantness. Digilit al. 2001. In addition, the qualitative attributes ascribed to an odor is often affected by the emotional connotation of the term applied to it. Hers and von Cleef, 2001. This has often been thought to be purely psychological, but certainly has a neurological basis. Because odor identification depends on the recall of olfactory receptor patterns, mention of a term associated with an odor can favor its recognition. If these psychological influences enhance appreciation, they may be beneficial. They certainly influence wine sales. Conversely, it can also result in disappointment, as in the case of tasting a wine at home without the accompanying ambience of the bistro by the beach on vacation. Memories often incorporate incidental associated aspects, a reflection of the holistic experience, not just the wine. Experience tends to generate idiotypic recollections, against which new wines are compared. Husen and Borks, 2002. In this absence, novice Tasters generally use sensory attributes, such as sweetness, on which to base judgments. Solomon, 1988. The involvement of olfactory memory in wine assessment by wine professionals is supported by functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. For example, sommeliers showed greater activity in left insular and orbitofrontal complex than novice tasters. The principal areas activated in novice tasters were the primary gustatory cortex and regions associated with emotional processing, Castriotiscanderbeg. It al. 2005. Further evidence of preconditioning has been obtained by McClure et al. 2004. fMRI imaging was used to follow the activity of different parts of the brain when subjects tasted different cola drinks. Without brand knowledge, response was similar for both brands. However, when brand identification was provided, the response pattern changed considerably, affecting not only sensory regions but also emotional, reward, and memory centers of the brain. Thus, brand marketing can change brain response, even when sensory clues are insufficient to permit discrimination. Although it is usual to think primarily of smelling in relation to olfaction, retronasal olfaction is also an important component, Figs 3.27 and 3.28. However, clear differentiation between these distinct olfactory. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 92. Sensations can be complicated, especially when odorants possess gustatory and trigeminal attributes. In addition, orthonasal and retronasal olfaction differ in fundamental aspects. Halpern, 2004, Nigoas et al., 2008. Not only is identification of odorants poorer retronasally, Fig 3.29, but threshold values are generally higher. Retronasal versus orthonasal activation also generates temporally different response patterns in the brain. Frasnelli et al. 2005, Small et al. 2005. This reflects the long-held hypothesis that sensation in the nose resembles a gas chromatogram response to different ligands. The reactive structure of an aromatic compound is spatially distributed along the olfactory patches. Furthermore, retronasal olfaction selectively activates the central sulcus, a site associated with impulses from the oral cavity. This may partially explain why flavors are thought to generate in the mouth. In an absolute sense they do. The olfactory component of flavor originates in the mouth and progresses into the nose via the pharynx. The difference in response pattern between orthonasal and retronasal administration of odors is particularly distinct between food or non-food related odors. This is likely related to learned, integrated, multisensory response patterns. Even color has a different effect on perceived odor intensity, depending on how it is provided. It can affect orthonasal detection but Figure 3.27 average time intensity curves for nasal, sniff, inhalation, inhale, retronasal, sip, and oral, sip, nose plugged, response for ethanol intensity of 10% V/V ethanol, from Lee, 1989, reproduced by permission. Figure 3.28 perceived sweetness intensity of sodium saccharine, C1, 7.2010. 4. M, C2, 1.68. 10. 4. m, C3, 3.9510. 4. m, in the presence, or absence, of ethyl butyriate, 1.3310. 3% by volume, when sipped with the nostrils either open or closed, modified from Murphy et al., 1977. Reproduced by permission. Sources of variation in olfactory perception 93. Does not influence retronasal sensation. Koza et al., 2005. The difference between orthonasal and retronasal perception has been confirmed in clinical studies. Landis et al. 2005. Demonstrated that a loss of orthonasal smell does not necessarily result in an equivalent loss of retronasal smell, suggesting a distinct processing mechanism. With such differences, it is not surprising that the in-glass fragrance of a wine is often different from its in-mouth sensation. As might be expected, the concentration of aromatics supplied retronasally is lower than that via the nose. About 1/8 th, Linforth et al., 2002. Aspiration or other oral agitation in the mouth facilitates the continued liberation of aromatics, based on their relative volatility. The more rapidly a compound volatilizes, the more rapidly it needs to be replenished at the air/wine interface. Their study also showed that dilution by saliva did not appear to significantly affect retronasal concentration of the compounds studied. The rate of airflow out the nose appeared to be the most important factor, followed by dilution in the nasal passages, and adsorption by the nasal mucosa. However, studies by Haleman and Hummel, 2004, suggest that flow rate alone does not explain lower retronasal odor detection. This may relate to retronasal olfaction involving differential processing, as noted previously. Swallowing is a major factor in directing airflow into the nasal passages, and, therefore, the concentration of volatiles present, Hodgson et al., 2005. Figure 3.29 Comparison of orthonasal, black diamond, and retronasal dose-response curves of a homologous series of esters, from Diaz. 2004, reproduced by permission. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 94. Exhalation is the other principal source of the intermittent, pulsed, airflow that supplies aromatics to the nasal passages. That flow is pulsed and the concentration significantly lower. The phenomenon of adaptation is presumably less significant than during prolonged orthonasal smelling, Cook et al. 2003. The most significant contribution of retronasal olfaction in wine tasting is its involvement in the perception of the finish. The vapor pressure differences between aromatics, their relative absorption in and / or destruction by saliva enzymes, rates of absorption in the pharynx and nasal mucosa, and destruction by mucosal enzymes influence the perceived duration and intensity of the finish. These effects are illustrated in Figs. 3.30 and 3.31. Additional factors include the reversible association of aromatics in non-volatile complexes with wine constituents, such as mannoproteins. The molecular structure of such non-volatile complexes is unknown, but may be similar to the incorporation of molecules in cyclodextrin micelles. They possess hydrophobic interiors and hydrophilic exteriors. Learned associations further complicate issues, as where changes in the perceived 100 signal intensity percent 0 100 0 0.05 0.10 0.15 0.20 time min a b 0.25 0.30 0.35 0.40 0.45 0.00 0.50 Figure 3.30 breath by breath profiles for the consumption of an aqueous solution containing anethol A and pKim B. The solution was consumed at 0 minutes, and the signal intensity for each compound was followed for 0.5 minutes thereafter. The maximum signal intensity has been normalized to 100% for each compound. From Linforth and Taylor, 2000. Reproduced by permission. Sources of variation in olfactory perception 95. Pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla. Forest Hill Merivale, Forest Hill Merivale, Forest Hill Merivale, Forest Hill 3 0 3 0 3 0 3 0 Merivale, Forest Hill 15 seconds Merivale 15 seconds, Forest Hill 30 seconds Merivale 30 seconds, Forest Hill 60 seconds Merivale 60 seconds, Forest Hill 120 seconds Merivale 120 seconds, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic 3 2 1 0 pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic 3 2 1 0 pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic 3 2 1 0 pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic 3 2 1 0 pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic 3 2 1 0 pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic 3 2 1 0 0 0 pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic. 3, 2, 1. Pungent, fruity, citrus, flowery, malty, woody, vanilla, smoky, buttery, honey, clove, ethanolic. 3, 2, 1. Figure 3.31. Time-resolved retronasal evaluation of the intensities of odor attributes and their overall odor intensities. Middle graph, after intraoral application and expectoration of 2 Chardonnay wines, from Poetner, 2004, reproduced by permission. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 96. Intensity of a tastant can influence the perceived intensity of an aromatic, without changing its actual concentration in the nose. Hollowood et al. 2002. Odor assessment in wine tasting. The assessment of fragrance is one of the most difficult and discriminative aspects of wine tasting. Olfaction generates the most diverse and complex perceptions in wine. The distinctive varietal, stylistic, and aging characteristics of wines are largely aromatic in nature. This property may be obscured in tasting sheets and scorecards, where aspects of fragrance are often submerged under the term flavor. Nevertheless, it is fragrance that gives wine the majority of its specialist market appeal. In wine tasting, connoisseurs are primarily interested in the positive, pleasure-giving aspects of a wine's fragrance. Regrettably, little progress has been made in describing varietal, regional, or stylistic features in a format meaningful to others. Figure 1.3 provides a range of wine descriptive terms. Unfortunately, samples are a nuisance to prepare, maintain, and standardize. Even pure chemicals can contain contaminants that alter odor quality. Milgaard et al., 1982. Microencapsulated, scratch, and sniff strips would be ideal and efficient, but are commercially unavailable. In critical tasting, though, only a few descriptors are usually necessary to differentiate, versus identify, between similar groups of wines. Lawless, 1984b. The distinction of 2 categories of wine fragrance, aroma and bouquet, is of long standing. Their differentiation is based on origin. Aroma traditionally refers to odorants, or their precursors, derived from grapes. Although usually applied to compounds giving grape varieties their distinctive fragrance, aroma also includes odorants derived from grape sunburning, overripening, raisoning, or disease. Currently, there is no evidence supporting the common belief that grapes derive specific flavors from the soil. Terms such as flinty and gout de terroir may have meaning, but they do not refer to sensory attributes coming from flint or soil, respectively. The other major category, bouquet, refers to scents that develop during fermentation, processing, and aging. Fermentative bouquets include aromatics derived from yeast, alcoholic, or bacterial, malolactic, fermentation. Processing bouquets refer to odors derived from procedures such as the addition of distilled wine, port, baking, Madeira, fractional blending, sherry, yeast autolysis, sparkling wines, maturation in oak cooperage, and surlise. Odor assessment in wine tasting 97. Maturation. Aging bouquets refer to the fragrant elements that develop during in-bottle aging. Although the subdivision of wine fragrance into aroma and bouquet is common, this distinction is difficult to employ in practice. Similar or identical compounds may be derived from grape, yeast, or bacterial metabolism, or be generated by abiotic chemical reactions. In addition, only with long experience can the aroma aspects of a wine's fragrance be distinguished from its bouquet of odors. In the absence of a clear definition of quality, it is not surprising that more is known about the chemical nature of wine faults than wine's positive attributes. The following section briefly summarizes the characteristics of several important wine odors. Appendix 5.2 gives directions for preparing faulty wine samples for training purposes. Quick and accurate identification of odors is advantageous to winemaker and wine merchant alike. For the winemaker, early remedial action can often correct the problem before the fault becomes more serious or intractable. For the wine merchant, avoiding losses associated with faulty wines improves the profit margin. Consumers should also know more about wine faults, but use it wisely and with discretion. Rejection should be based only on genuinely recognized faults, not unfamiliarity. Inappropriate expectations, the presence of bitartrate crystals, or dryness, often incorrectly termed vinegary. No precise definition of what constitutes a wine fault exists. Human perception is too variable. Wine faults are like grammar errors, designated by general consensus of groups of experts. Nevertheless, odors tend to have a common property. They tend to mask the wine's fragrance. For example, the suppression of a wine's fresh fragrance by corked, TCA, or bread taints, Liquor et al., 1999. Surprisingly, some compounds considered faults at above detection thresholds may be desirable at or near their detection thresholds. Examples are acetic acid and diacetyl. Thus, depending on personal sensitivity, what may be desirable to one may be repulsive to another. In addition, when aromatically delicate, they may be an essential and traditional element in certain wines. Examples are the oxidized bouquets of sherries and the fusel odor of ports. In other instances, odors such as barnyardy may be considered part of the goût de terroir of certain wines, and as such be highly appreciated. Even aspects considered normally desirable may be considered a fault to some, for example, the oakiness of Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 98. Some Chardonnay wines. It is the equivalent to whether there is too much or too little pepper in a recipe. Prestige of the wine may also to suppress the perception of a fault, such as the noticeable ethyl acetate character to several sourtons. Acetic acid, volatile acidity. Accumulation of acetic acid to detectable levels usually results from the action of acetic acid bacteria. Detection and recognition thresholds are about 100 times higher than those for ethyl acetate. Vinegary wines typ. Ically are sharply acidic, with an irritating odor derived from the combined effects of acetic acid and ethyl acetate. Acetic acid concentrations in wine should not exceed 0.7 g per liter. Frequently, people unfamiliar to wine miss. Take the acidic attribute of many table wines with vinegar. Baked. Some fortified wines, such as Madeira, are purposely heated to over 45 C. Under such conditions, the wine develops a distinctive, baked, caramelized odor. Although characteristic and expected in wines such as Madeira, a baked odor is a negative feature in table wines. In table wines, a baked odor is usually indicative of exposure to high temperatures during transit or steer age. A baked essence can develop within a few weeks at above 35 C. It involves a series of thermal degradation reactions, often involving sugars, notably fructose, and amino acids. Reactions of this type generate what are usually termed Maillard products. Buttery. Diacetyl usually is found in wine at low concentrations as a result of yeast and bacterial metabolism. It may also be an oxidative byproduct of maturation. In oak barrels, although typically considered to possess a butter-like odor, diacetyl is a negative quality factor significantly above its recognition threshold. For some individuals, the author included other constituents accompanying diacetyl give it a crushed earthworm, decomposing hemoglobin, odor. Bartowski et al. 2002, have shown that wine possessing a buttery character may have diacetyl contents below its detection threshold. Thus, other compounds, such as acetone and 2,3-pentanedione, may play a role in contributing to the buttery attribute. Corky/moldy. Wines may show corky or moldy odors due to the presence of a range of compounds. One of the most common is 2,4,6-trichloronisole, TCA. It, Ophodus 99, usually develops as a consequence of fungal growth on or in cork, following the use of PCP, a pentachlorophenol fungicide, on cork trees, or the bleaching of stoppers with chlorine. It produces a distinctive, musty, chlorophenol odor at a few parts per trillion. Its detection is often influenced by the type of wine. Mazzolini and Maggi, 2007. Other corky Ophodus may come from the presence of 2,4,6-tribromonisols, Chatanit et al., 2004, or 2-methoxy-3,5-dimethylpyrazine, Simpson et al., 2004. Musty Ophodus in cork may also originate from sesquiterpenes produced by filamentous bacteria, such as Streptomyces. Additional moldy odors in cork can result from the production of guaricol and geosmin by fungi such as Penicillium and Aspergillus. Although most moldy, corky, taints come from cork, oak cooperage or moldy grapes can also be sources of similar Ophodus. Ethyl acetate. Wines spoiled by the presence of ethyl acetate are far less common than in the past. Sudrord, 1978. At concentrations below 50 mg/L, ethyl acetate may add a subtle fragrance. However, above about 100 mg/L, it begins to have a negative influence, possibly due to suppression of the fragrance of other aromatic compounds such as fruit esters, pigot and Findlay. 1984. At above 150 mg/L, ethyl acetate generates an obvious acetone Cutex W remover, like Ophoda. Threshold values vary with the type and intensity of the wine's fragrance. Correspondingly, it is more readily apparent in white than red wines. Spoilage microbes are the most common source of ethyl acetate offodus. Nonetheless, it can accumulate abiotically from the esterification of ethanol in the presence of acetic acid. Ethyl phenols. Ethyl phenols can donate a variety of offodus, depending primarily on their concentration. These can vary from smoky, spicy, phenolic, to medicinal attributes, at near threshold values, to sweaty, leather, barnyardy, or manure taints at higher concentrations. This variation, combined with individual sensitivity, may partially explain why some winemakers consider them desirable and part of the distinctive characteristics of their wines. In contrast, others find them revolting enough to make the wine undrinkable. The odors develop primarily as a consequence of the growth of Brettanomyces. The yeast can contaminate wine, converting several hydroxycinnamic acids, non-flavonoid phenolics, into their corresponding ethyl phenols. Consequently, red wines tend to experience Brett odors more than white wines. Different strains of Brettanomyces possess different enzymatic abilities to oxidize hydroxycinnamic acids to vinyl and subsequently ethyl phenols. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 100. Contamination of wine can occur when the wine is stored in insufficiently disinfected cooperage or passes through contaminated transfer connections. The yeast can grow on even-minute remnants of wine. Upon contamination, the yeast can generate ethyl phenols either in cooperage or in bottle fusel. During fermentation, yeasts produce limited amounts of higher fusel alcohols. At concentrations close to their detection thresholds, they can add to the aromatic complexity of a wine. If these alcohols accumulate to levels greater than about 300 mg/liter, they generally are considered a negative quality factor. Nevertheless, presence of a fusel note is characteristic and expected in Portuguese ports, Porto. It comes from the concentration of fusel alcohols during distillation in the production of the largely unrectified wine spirits used to fortify port. Geranium-like. The distinctive off-odor known as geranium-like occasionally tainted wine in the past, due to the use of sorbate as a wine preservative. Metabolism of sorbate by certain lactic acid bacteria converted it to 2-ethoxyhexa-3,5-dene. This compound has a sharp, penetrating odor resembling scented geranium. As a consequence, sorbate is currently rarely used in wine preservation. Light-struck, gout de lumière, refers to a series of off-odors that can develop in wine exposed to light. In champagne, it apparently results from the generation of dimethyl sulfide, methyl mercaptan, and dimethyl disulfide. Charpentier and Morgan, 1981. However, D'Auria et al. 2003, failed to confirm this, finding instead an increased presence of 2-methylpropanol, a fusel alcohol, and a significant modification of, as well as reduction in, the presence of many fruit esters. Mousy. Several lactic acid bacteria and Brettanomyces yeasts generate mousy taints. The odor is caused by the synthesis of several tetrahydropyridines and related compounds. Because they are not readily volatile at wine pH values, their presence is seldom detected on smelling the wine. Their odors become evident only on tasting. Winemakers often put a small amount of wine on their hands and Use the palm and sniff technique for quick detection of a mousy taint. Sensitivity to this taint can vary by 2 orders of magnitude. Binet al. 1996. Ophodus 101. Oxidation. Presence of an obviously oxidized aspect is now comparatively rare in seal table wine. Oxidation produces a flat sensation, which at the extreme may possess a range of aldehyde-like odors. This is often associated with browning in white wines and the development of premature brackish hues in red wines. Nevertheless, short-term oxidation does not appear to be correlated with the accumulation of acetaldehyde. Escudero et al. 2002. This apparent anomaly may result from the low concentration of odophenols in most white wines. Their oxidation is the most significant source of the peroxide that generates aldehydes in bottled wines. Sherries possess a complex oxidized odor, due primarily to the presence of acetaldehyde and branched methyl aldehydes. Color et al. 2007. The latter tend to possess dried fruit to orange-like flavors. In contrast, oxidized table wines possess few branched aldehydes but significant amounts of 2-alkanols, unbranched aldehydes with a double carbon bond on the second carbon. Color et al. 2007. Important examples are 2-nonol, 2-octanol, methionol, and phenylacetaldehyde. These may express a range of odor qualities, variously described as cooked vegetable, pungent, earthy, moldy, and rancid. In aged wine, both branched and unbranched aldehydes accumulate. However, the branched forms appear to suppress the perception of the undesirable, unbranched forms. Color et al. 2007. The early expression of oxidation in table wine appears to be associated with the use of faulty corks or improper cork insertion. In addition, cork stoppers may contain sufficient oxygen to induce detectable oxidative browning in white wine. Caligiris et al. 1997. Oxygen can also seep into the wine through the cork or probably more frequently between it and the bottle neck. Rapid temperature changes can favor the latter by loosening the seal, due to pressure on the cork caused by alternate expansion and constriction in wine volume. Leaving a bottle standing upright for an extended period can result in cork shrinkage, due to drying, followed by oxygen ingress. Nevertheless, even under seemingly acceptable storage conditions, most white wines often begin to show obvious signs of browning within 4 to 5 years. The most well-known reaction associated with wine oxidation involves the production of hydrogen peroxide, from the interaction of oxygen and wine phenolics. Hydrogen peroxide subsequently reacts with other wine constituents, such as alcohols, fatty acids, esters, and terpenes. Because ethanol is the reactant occurring in the highest concentration, the principal byproduct of wine oxidation is acetaldehyde. However, its rapid binding to other constituents tends to keep the free acetaldehyde content below its detection threshold. Only after extensive oxidation does acetaldehyde accumulate to the point that it can influence wine fragrance. The precise mechanism by which other aldehydes form in wine has yet to be investigated. Chapter 3, Olfactory Sensations 102. As noted, oxidative reactions with other wine constituents progressively reduce the varietal character of the wine. Oxidation and subsequent polymerization of wine phenolics lead to the formation of brown pigments. Although browning occurs in both red and white wines, it becomes apparent earlier in white wines due to their paler color. White wines, although possessing fewer phenolic compounds than red wines, are also less able to inactivate molecular oxygen, limiting other forms of oxidation. Peng et al. 1998, have shown that browning can affect the acceptance ratings of white wines. What is unclear is how important it is to the average consumer under non-laboratory conditions. In contrast to the slow oxidative changes in bottled wine, wine placed in bag-in-box packages often oxidize within a year. This results from the slow infiltration of air around or through the spigot. New advancements in spigot design and manufacture may limit this deficiency in an otherwise consumer-friendly package. Oxidation problems can occur at any stage in wine production. However, for consumers, oxidation is primarily of concern following bottle opening. During the normal time frame of consumption, this does not appear to have a detectable sensory significance. Russell et al. 2005. However, if the wine is not fully consumed within a few hours, it begins to lose its original flavor. Surprisingly, this does not involve the production of significant concentrations of acetaldehyde. What appears more important is the rapid loss in ethyl and acetate esters. Russell et al. 2005. Because oxygen uptake is significantly retarded at cold temperatures, minimizing the duration of exposure to air and storage at refrigerator temperatures should delay oxidative deterioration after bottle opening. For example, air/wine contact is about 0.4 cm to /100 ml in a 750 ml bottle at opening. Pouring about half the contents increases the surface area/volume ratio by about 20 times, 7.5 cm to /100 ml. Because the air in the bottle would contain about 120 mg oxygen, it should be reduced as much as possible by vacuum or preferably flushing with an inert gas such as carbon dioxide, nitrogen, or argon. A phenomenon termed bottle sickness refers to development of a short-lived off odor that may develop in wines bottled without prior flush.